Amen. Well, we are going to continue in our series through the book of Proverbs this morning. And the topic I want us to consider this morning is a topic that's extremely applicable, extremely pressing and relevant for every single person. And that is, what does wisdom look like in our speech? What does wisdom look like in our speech? And if you didn't know, the book of Proverbs gives a ton of attention to our speech. In fact, it's potentially the most prominent theme throughout the entire book. In fact, in our English translations, there are over 120 verses that include the words mouth, speech, lips, or words. So pretty important. Talks about it a lot as it tries to understand and give guidance about what it's like to live with godly wisdom in this life. And we can kind of understand why, right? I mean, communication is just so vital in life. It's a major part of life. And coming to grips with what the Bible teaches about our speech is so important for us, I think, especially in 2023, because we understand that we have far more avenues for communication than any other time in history. Right? I mean, which means that guidance for how we are to speak, how we use our communication, how we use our words, just applies to so many more areas of life for us today. And so, even though our verses this morning, we're going to look at a lot of them, they use words like mouth or lips and words. We understand that Proverbs instructions could even include tweets and posts and texts and emails and so on and so forth, right? We understand that. But again, communication is just a massive part of our daily life. In fact, just a couple basic statistics on communication kind of helps us understand this enormous role that communication plays in our daily life. So for example, on average, you know, the average person speaks 16,000 words a day. Now, obviously, more for some, less for others, right? Like for me, I'd guess the only days I even come close to that are days that I'm preaching. Beyond that, I probably don't even get near that, I would guess. For others, I mean, you've probably hit that number by lunchtime. And like, you're not slowing down. Like, so again, average is the key word there. On average, 23 to 27 billion text messages are sent a day worldwide. Not surprisingly, that varies by age, right? Those under 24 send around 128 text messages a day. That number goes down as the age bracket goes up, of course. As far as social media goes, 60% of the world's population uses social media. That's nearly 5 billion people. The average daily time spent on social media is 2 hours and 24 minutes. Of course, the number of posts are going to vary, right? If you're an influencer or a wannabe influencer, you're going to do more than people who just kind of stalk other people on social media. But the point is, the ways we communicate continually change. But the need for and the practice of communication always remains. It's just a necessary part of daily life. And so God gives us guidance. After all, he is the God who communicates. And he calls us to follow him, right? And so this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about wise speech. What does Proverbs say about wisdom in our speech? Next week, we're going to look at what Proverbs says about unwise speech or even sinful speech and understand there's going to be some overlap between the 2 weeks because Proverbs often teaches by contrast, right? So the wise do this while the fools do this. And we'll see that even this morning. So there's going to be some overlap. But obviously, there's no way we're going to be able to cover everything Proverbs says about speech this morning or even next. So what I want to do this morning is just point out some general principles about wisdom in our speech, wisdom in our communication. And we're going to look at a lot of verses bouncing all over the place. So follow along the best you can. As always, if you didn't know, our manuscripts are put online with the sermon. So if you want to go back and look at some of the references, look at some of the sources we use for quotes or things like that, that's always available for you as well, okay? All right, so let me give 2 big picture truths about wisdom and speech. And then after that, let me give 5 specific characteristics of wise speech in Proverbs. Okay, so 2 big picture truths. Number 1, Proverbs says that the way we use our words is a defining characteristic of the wise and the foolish. That the way we use our words is a defining characteristic of both the wise and the foolish. Okay? In fact, in the book of Proverbs, we're presented with these two really important characters, and I call them characters because they're not real people. They're metaphorical women who embody one wisdom and one foolishness. In Proverbs 8, we hear from what we might call woman wisdom. And notice how Proverbs describes woman wisdom. Proverbs chapter 8, we'll start in verse 1. It says, "Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portal she cries aloud. To you, O man, I call, and my cries to the children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence, O fools, learn sense. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There's nothing twisted or crooked in them. They're all straight to him who understands and right to those who find knowledge." It goes on and on. There's a lot to say about woman wisdom in Proverbs, but notice that one of her defining characteristics is her speech. That she speaks noble things. It says there in verse 6, that she speaks truth, that she speaks righteously, that she speaks for the betterment of others to build them up. We'll talk more about that in a minute. As in Proverbs 8, well, in Proverbs 9, we actually hear about and from woman folly. On the other hand, this is Proverbs 9, we'll pick up in verse 13. It says, "The woman folly is loud. She's seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by who are going straight on their way. Whoever's simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he doesn't know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol." So again, there's this contrast between woman wisdom and woman folly. And here, woman folly is loud in verse 13. Now, it doesn't mean that you're foolish because you have a loud voice, right? That's not what that means. It carries with it this idea that it's restless, or that she's always stirring up trouble, or he's always stirring up trouble, trying to be a negative influence in other people's lives, as the rest of the passage describes, that this fool speaks to destroy people. And we're going to give, again, more attention to these general characteristics in just a sec. But we should just recognize that first, that our speech says far more about us than what's on our minds. Right? Notice Proverbs 16:23. There's just one example where it says, "The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips." Like, notice the connection there between the heart and the speech. This is seen over and over and over again because our speech reveals our character. Right? In other words, what you say and how you say it reveals something about your heart and not just your opinion. Again, our speech reveals whether we're wise or foolish in heart. Wise speech reveals a wise heart. Foolish speech reveals a foolish heart. And again, this is really important for us because I think we're tempted to think that speech really is just an outflow or an overflow of our mind, and it is to some extent, but you understand the Bible teaches that it's also the overflow of our heart. That the health or lack of health in the way we talk and what we talk about is an indicator of the health or the lack of health of our hearts, whether we're experiencing spiritual health or spiritual unhealth. Of course, Jesus taught this as well. You remember what Jesus said? This is Luke chapter 6, verse 45 as one example. He said, "The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks." Again, there's a connection between what we say and how we say it and the health of our hearts, how we're doing spiritually. I've heard people say about someone else that the thing I really appreciate about that person is, they just speak their mind. They just say what's on their mind. There's no guessing. You just know what's going on. You know what they're thinking. But they say it as if, that's the most important quality or character quality we should develop. It's not. Because they're not only speaking their mind, they're actually speaking their heart as well. It also matters what they're saying. It also matters how they're saying it. And Proverbs are going to go about this, and we'll talk about this here in a sec. But again, I think this is super helpful for us to remember because if you're ever unsure about how you're doing spiritually and you need some kind of gauge, like how's my heart? One helpful way to gauge your heart is by gauging your speech. It might be good for you to ask some questions of yourself. It would probably be better for you to ask someone near you, someone that you're in communication with, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a sibling or a colleague, and just ask, how would you characterize my speech? What do I talk about most? Why do you think I talk about that most? Because in doing so, it's revealing something about our hearts. Again, the first big truth Proverbs in the Bible wants us to understand is that the way you and I use our words is a defining characteristic of the wise and the foolish. The second big major truth in Proverbs is that wise people just understand that what they say and how they say it has tremendous consequences. Wise people just understand that what we say and how we say it has huge consequences. Proverbs 18:21, a very familiar proverb, speaks to this very clearly. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat of its fruits. Now, first of all, it's important to understand what that verse is not saying. It is not saying that you and I possess, some kind of divine ability to speak things into existence, like a better job or financial prosperity or some kind of physical healing. That's important because there is a stream of theology that does believe that. And they use this verse as a foundation of their teaching that our words, they say, are so powerful that we just need to declare something and it will come true. So just declare it. My wife and I, Danielle, we're just like all couples. And every so often we have that age-old conversation when we can't decide what or where to eat. Everybody goes through this, right? So she'll say, hey, what do you want? And I'm pretty low maintenance. I have a real low standard for food. I'm happy just to eat. I'm just thrilled. And so I really don't care most of the time. I don't care. And so I'll say, you know what? I don't really care. What do you want? And my wife is way too sweet to say what she wants. She's too sweet sometimes to just declare what she wants because she wants to be accommodating to me or to our kids. She doesn't want to ask us to eat something that maybe she knows we don't really care for. But I know there's something that she prefers. There's something that she wants. And so I'll often joke and say, just name it and claim it. And in that case, she really can speak into existence what we're going to have for dinner. Because I really don't care. She can literally eat the fruits of her speech, as Proverbs 18:21 it talks about. But the vast majority of the time, when things are out of our control, we don't have the creative speaking power to declare things to be real. Only God has that power. So we don't declare things like health. We don't declare things like provision. What Christians do is we pray to the one who can declare those things. And then we trust in him to accomplish his good will in our life, right? So it's important to understand that, again, having the power to speak reality into existence is not what this proverb says. Okay, what it is saying, though, and so many other proverbs teach, is that there are tremendous consequences of our speech, both good, characterized by life here, and bad, characterized by death here. Okay, and this is true for how we speak to others, right? So for example, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18, there's one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. I mean, sometimes we just use our words as weapons, don't we? Why do we do that? Because it's effective. We know it works. I mean, if you've been on the receiving end, you know that. And so we stab with words. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 25, another example. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Notice the good consequence. That we can lift spirits by a word aptly spoken at the right time, as Proverbs says. So we have this tremendous responsibility. There's tremendous consequences for others, but also for ourselves. Notice Proverbs 13:3. It says, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Proverbs 18, verse 6, a fool's lips walk into a fight and his mouth invites a beating. You know people like that? You been that person? Right, so we have to understand, like knowing these two big truths about our speech, that wise speech is the defining characteristic of the wise, and that we should seek out to be wise with our speech because of its consequences. We should ask, what are those characteristics? How can I be wise with my communication? So what are some of the ways the book of Proverbs describes wise speech? I'm just going to give 5. There's plenty more. I'm encourage you to read through Proverbs maybe this week, pick those verses out. But let me just give 5 this morning. The first one is that wise speech is true. The wise speech is honest. In fact, we saw that in Proverbs 8 in that description of woman wisdom, right? That her words speak truth. And there are many, many, many other passages that speak to the foolishness of lying. We're going to talk a little bit more about honesty and lying next week, but suffice to say that the wise person is determined to present reality with his or her words rather than a mirage. Because there's no wisdom in ignoring reality. Right? There's no wisdom in twisting situations into something that's false. Speaking only true things is good and right, not only because we're reflecting a God who is honest and true and right in what he says, but also because, it just enables everyone to know what is reality and so that they can best function within that reality, whatever that situation is. Like wise people know that lying, again, being beyond an offense to our truthful God, just creates chaos and problems down the road. And so the wise person isn't tricked into thinking, I can bend the truth a little bit and it won't have any kind of consequence in the future. So again, we'll talk more about that next week. But again, wise speech is true. It's honest. We'll move on and spend a little more time on the other. Second, wise speech is life-giving. Wise speech is life-giving. Notice Proverbs chapter 10, verse 11. It says, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Again, we all know that our words have the ability to do incredible damage to others, but on the flip side of that, as we saw in Proverbs 18, they have the ability to do incredible good for others. I'm sure you can, but I can think of several times when someone has spoken a word of encouragement to me, whether that's in person, face-to-face, whether that was by email, whether that was a text message or a message on Facebook, and it just did so good for my heart. And it alleviated some kind of fear or concern, or assuaded some doubt I was having. It just spoke new life and breathed new life and courage into me. It was just a blessing. I received a card just this week with incredibly encouraging words from someone in the church. It was just a blessing. It breathed some new life in me. And the wise understand that, and they leverage that. The wise speak in a way that brings life to others, because there's great wisdom in just knowing that most people are in need of some encouragement. As a pastor in ministry, this has been probably one of the greatest lessons I've learned. First and foremost, everybody needs the gospel, but I'll never meet someone that doesn't need some kind of encouragement in some way. It doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what the situation is, whether they're coming across like they got it all together, I know they need some encouragement some way. And so if I'm looking for it, I can leverage my words to help and be that person who's wise with my words. In fact, I really like how one Christian author who teaches on communication, he described the goal for Christian speech is that we should be servant communicators. I love that phrase. Because what he's saying is, we have this opportunity, and really it's a tool, our communication, our speech, is a tool that, yes, we can do some really terrible things with, but we can be good stewards of it and leverage it to serve people. That we are people who follow Jesus, who came to serve and not be served. And so we're called to serve others. And we do that not just in our actions, as important as that is and right as that is, but also in our words. And so oftentimes, our goal for communication is so much different than that. Certainly there's just the normal surface level communication. We're just trying to convey information to one another. That's a normal part of life. But oftentimes we speak with other motivations, don't we? That we just want to share our opinion, maybe to impress other people. That we want to get things off our chest to feel better about a situation. We want to cut someone down to feel better about ourselves. But what if, instead of thinking only about sharing our opinion, you thought, man, how can I use this conversation? How can I use this medium, whatever that is, whether that's face-to-face, social media, text message, whatever. How can I use this to build up the other person? How can I encourage them? How can my words be a fountain of life in this situation? How can I best serve this person or this group of people within this interaction? Proverbs says that's the wise and righteous way to speak, that it's life-giving, it's edifying. A third thing Proverbs talks about, that wise speech is gracious and gentle. Wise speech is gracious and gentle. Now, this is not the championed quality of speech in our hostile age at all. I mean, even among Christians. But I understand the Bible calls Christians to gracious and gentle speech, and for a number of reasons. First of all, gracious words are those words that produce life. Right, so we want to serve others, we want to build them up, we want to encourage them. How do we do that? Actually with encouraging words, with gracious and gentle words. Proverbs talks about this, Proverbs 16:24. It says, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Or Proverbs 15, verse 4, a gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Again, I think we often think, you know what, all people need is truth. So as long as I'm conveying truth, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how I communicate it. All that matters is that it's true. Maybe they need to hear it. But understand, like, how you say it is important too. It's important too. In fact, the wise know that gracious and gentle words are actually more persuasive. Notice what Proverbs says is Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs 22, verse 11, he who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king as his friend. Or Proverbs 16:21, the wise of heart is called discerning, and sweetness of speech very plainly increases persuasiveness. Like, understand, no one is persuaded by name calling. No one is persuaded by rudeness. No one is persuaded because you've typed in all caps with clapping hand emojis in between each word. Like, that's not persuasive. And the wise understand that. Now, this doesn't mean we don't speak sometimes in very firm ways in some situations, but the Bible is clear that the default posture or the Christ-like posture of the one who follows Christ should be gentleness and graciousness. In fact, I'll regularly see someone on Twitter or Facebook or wherever kind of defend mean speech in a weird way or just rude speech. And they do that by pointing to the scene in the Gospels where you remember where Jesus is in the temple and he overthrows the tables and makes the whip and drives them all out. And they'll say, see, I mean, I'm just being like Jesus. He wasn't gentle in the temple. Okay. But then what happens is that becomes their posture to everyone and everything in every single post, no matter what the conversation is about. That's become their default posture. Like, first of all, Jesus was right in his actions. There is such a thing as righteous anger, right? But like, don't pattern your speech as if Jesus just went around yelling at people and calling them names all the time. Like, we follow the one who's gentle and lowly in heart. He's authoritative. He speaks truth, but he's compassionate and gracious, and he's gentle with us. We follow him. In fact, Paul describes his communication with the Corinthian church as being done by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. That's 2 Corinthians 10. Peter says that should always be ready to give an answer to those who ask for the reason for our hope, but we do it with gentleness. 1 Peter 3. Paul instructs believers to make their gentleness evident to everyone. Philippians 4:5. I mean, this is the calling for us. Not only as Christians, but just because it's wise. Again, wise and Christian speech is gentle and gracious. Gentle and gracious. Fourth thing, wise speech is controlled. It's controlled. Notice Proverbs 17:27-28. He says, whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he's deemed intelligent. I love those verses, are great. I love that description of being cool in spirit, right? A cool spirit. They're the ones with understanding. But they aren't quick to speak up. They aren't quick to make their opinions known. They don't run off at the mouth. They're cool and collected. This is wise, again, for a number of reasons. Number one, it just keeps you out of trouble, just practically. Again, Proverbs 21:23, whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. We all know that to be true. We've all been there, right? We've been quick to share, quick to speak up, quick to insert ourselves and share our thoughts about something or someone or a situation, quick to weigh in some controversy online or in conversation, only for days later to regret it. I didn't help, I actually caused more problems. I wasn't controlled with my speech, right? The wise are controlled though, because controlled speech better equips us to know how to answer. That's what he says in Proverbs 15:28. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. And so the wise person knows, man, I just need more information before I can really speak into something. Right? Like I need to know as much as I can to give an accurate or helpful answer. It doesn't mean you can't say, well, at this point, this is kind of where I am, this is kind of what I'm thinking. But there's wisdom in just saying that. But so often we fail. We just make quick judgments after reading just the headline, or we settle into one tribe or another without any real interaction or conversation with someone we might deem from another tribe. We give quick rebukes when we only know part of the situation. Or on the flip side, we give quick affirmations before hearing the ways maybe someone's contributed to a conflict. But the wise, on the other hand, says, you know what, I'm just going to be a little bit more controlled because I know I need a little bit more information before I make any kind of definitive statement or opinion. The wise are controlled in their speech. A fifth and final thing here, the wise speech is humble. Wise speech is humble. Look at Proverbs 27, verse 2. Let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. Or Proverbs 30, verse 32. If you've been foolish, exalting yourself, or if you've been devising evil, put your hand on your mouth. Shut up, in other words. I mean, can you think of someone who's a one-upper? Like that person who, no matter what someone is talking about, they've had a bigger or better experience, or they have greater knowledge or expertise. I can think of that. Anyone been that one-upper? I have. More than you, by the way. Anyone tempted to kind of praise your accomplishments on social media? I have, right? And by the way, it's okay to share good things that are happening in your life online, right? Joy shared is joy multiplied. There's a joy in community. You say, man, look at the good things God's doing in my life right now. That's a good thing and that's a right thing, but understand, there's a fine line between inviting others to rejoice with you and inviting others to praise you. And so often our motivation is kind of the latter, right? So just we're careful with that, but the wise know, man, that's not a good look. In fact, we're trying to impress others, but it does just the opposite because we can see that. People can see that. And so the wise says, you know what, I'm just going to follow Jesus. I'm going to serve him to the best of my ability and allow others to praise me if they decide to. And if they don't, I'm okay with that too. Right? I mean, wise speech is humble. Again, there's so many other things that Proverbs says about speech, and I encourage you to walk through that and pick out those characteristics because, again, we know I need to be a good steward of my words. They have tremendous consequences. It's a gauge of my heart, and so I want to steward those things well. I want to use them well. It's a responsibility God's given me. Again, the Bible has so much to say about it, but I know when we hear those characteristics, it's so easy to say, man, I can think of people like that, but I know I've fallen short of that so many times. I haven't used my words that way. I haven't been wise with words. I haven't stewarded them well. We all do. In fact, we might identify, I think, probably better next week when we talk about unwise and foolish and sinful speech. It's humbling to realize, man, I need to grow in wisdom when it comes to how I communicate and how I speak to family and friends and my wife or my husband or my kids or online. How do I interact with colleagues? It's humbling to know, man, I'm not the wisest sometimes, but I need to grow. The good news is there's grace for that. There's grace for that. Of course, we don't know everything that Jesus said during his life, how he interacted with people and how he spoke. We don't know everything, every conversation he had. But we do know that Jesus is wisdom himself, that in him are all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, Paul says in Colossians 2, that he's sinless in every single way, which would include his speech. And so the gospel reminds us that Jesus lived a life of honesty and self-control and gentleness and righteousness, even in his words, not just his actions. And we're reminded in the gospel that he was actively obedient, but he also was passively going to the cross to die for all the ways that we've been unwise. I mean, he died for all the ways that you and I failed to show wise speech. And we know now the good news of the gospel, that by faith in his finished work, we actually have our sin forgiven, and his righteousness is actually given to us by his grace. This is the good news of the gospel, and what we get to do time in and time out as a church is remember that, declare it, proclaim it, rejoice in it, but also observe it through communion. Every time we gather as a church to do so and we eat the bread, we're reminded of the body of Christ. We're reminded of his blood that was spilled for the remission of our sins, which includes unwise speech.